There's a moment in every person's life when silence becomes unbearable, when the words trapped deep inside the chest for decades begin to burn, demanding release. For Michael Jackson, that moment came not on a stage in front of millions, but in the quiet spaces between fame and loneliness, face to face with the ghost of his childhood. For 40 years, Michael Jackson carried something inside him, something heavy, something unspoken, words he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times but never dared to say out loud, words meant for one man only, his father, Joseph Jackson. What happened when he finally found the courage to speak? What was Joseph's reaction when the son he had molded with iron discipline looked him in the eye and spoke the truth he had buried since childhood? The answer will shake you, because this isn't just a story about a superstar and his father. This is about every child who has ever longed for 3 simple words. And what happens when those words never come? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Michael Jackson. The year was 2001. Michael Jackson stood backstage at the Oxford Union in England, his hands trembling slightly as he held the pages of his prepared speech. Outside, hundreds of students waited to hear from the king of pop. But Michael wasn't thinking about his music. He wasn't thinking about his fame. He was thinking about his father. You probably weren't surprised to hear that I did not have an idyllic childhood, Michael would tell the audience that night. The strain and tension that exists in my relationship with my own father is well documented. My father is a tough man, and he pushed my brothers and me hard, from the earliest age, to be the best performers we could be. He had great difficulty showing me affection. He never really told me he loved me, and he never really complimented me either. If I did a great show, he would tell me it was a good show, and if I did an okay show, he would say nothing. These weren't new feelings. Michael had carried them since he was 5 years old, rehearsing in that small house in Gary, Indiana, watching his father sit in a chair with a belt across his lap. He said that during his childhood, he often cried from loneliness. Michael recalled that Joseph sat in a chair with a belt in his hand as Michael and his siblings rehearsed, and that if you didn't do it the right way, he would tear you up, really get you. But speaking about pain publicly was one thing. Speaking it directly to the source of that pain, that was something Michael had never been able to do. He was 42 years old. He had sold hundreds of millions of records. He had changed the face of music, dance, and entertainment forever. Presidents sought his company. Kings bowed in his presence. Yet the thought of sitting across from Joseph Jackson and telling him what lived in his heart still made Michael's stomach turn. As he told Oprah in February 1993, some may call us strict disciplinarian or whatever, but he was very strict. He was very hard. Just a look would scare you. There's been times when he'd come to see me, and I would get sick. I'd start to regurgitate. Even as a grown man, even as a global icon, the fear remained. Before the Oxford speech, Michael called his father. He told him that he was about to give a speech at Oxford University and planned to speak about him. His father balked, probably expecting Michael's speech to be derogatory. "No," Michael said, "I'm going to say I love you, and I'm calling you to tell you that I love you." In that van, driving toward Oxford, something had shifted. Michael had decided that this night would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just in his public advocacy for children, but in his own private war with the past. That is why I want to forgive my father and to stop judging him. I want to forgive my father because I want a father, and this is the only one that I've got. I want the weight of my past lifted from my shoulders, and I want to be free to step into a new relationship with my father for the rest of my life, unhindered by the goblins of the past. The speech at Oxford was more than a lecture on children's rights. It was a public declaration of a man choosing to heal, a man choosing forgiveness over bitterness, a man finally ready to confront the deepest wound of his life. And now with time, rather than bitterness, I feel blessing. In the place of anger, I have found absolution. And in the place of revenge, I have found reconciliation. And my initial fury has slowly given way to forgiveness. But words spoken to an audience of strangers are different from words spoken to the man who caused the pain. Michael knew that the real conversation, the one that mattered most, still lay ahead. The question that haunted him remained unanswered. Would Joseph ever understand what he had done? Would he ever acknowledge the wounds he had inflicted? Would he ever say the 3 words Michael had longed to hear his entire life? The clock was ticking, and neither father nor son knew how little time they had left. To understand what Michael needed to say, we must first understand what had been done. Gary, Indiana, 1964. A cramped house on Jackson Street. Joseph worked as a welder and crane operator, sometimes holding as many as 3 jobs at a time to support his family. He abandoned his musical ambitions in part because of his burgeoning brood, which would eventually swell to include 9 children: Rebby, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, La Toya, Marlon, Michael, Randy, and youngest sister Janet, all living in a 3-room house in Gary. Joseph recalled from his early childhood that his father was domineering and strict, and he described himself in his memoir, The Jacksons, as a lonely child that had only few friends. The patterns of harshness, it seemed, stretched back generations. Joseph had dreams once. His father, Joe Jackson, was a former boxer, crane operator at U.S. Steel, and guitarist for local rhythm and blues band the Falcons. But life had other plans, so he poured his unfulfilled ambitions into his children, especially the small, bright-eyed boy who seemed to possess something supernatural. The rehearsals were relentless. Joseph had wanted his children to succeed, and was willing to push them to extremes to make it happen. His aggressive approach included strict rehearsals, often lasting for hours, and forbidding his children from socializing with others, effectively isolating them from normal childhood experiences. For Michael, this meant no chance to make friends or enjoy a typical childhood, as his every waking moment was devoted to practice. In one altercation, later recalled by Marlon Jackson, Joseph held Michael Jackson upside down by one leg and pummeled him over and over again with his hand, hitting him on his back and buttocks. Joseph would allegedly often trip up or push his sons into walls. One night, while Jackson was asleep, Joseph climbed into his room through the bedroom window. Wearing a fright mask, he entered the room screaming and shouting. Joseph said he wanted to teach his children not to leave the window open when they went to sleep. For a number of years afterward, Jackson suffered nightmares about being kidnapped from his bedroom. But the physical pain wasn't what haunted Michael most. It was something else, something harder to name. Michael described beatings with the switch of a tree branch, and a fear so great of his father that he would sometimes vomit at the sight of him. His children called him Joseph. They weren't allowed to call him by fatherly terms. "You call me Joseph." Janet Jackson recalled her father telling her once when she called him Dad, "I'm Joseph to you. Not Dad, not father. Joseph. A name, not a relationship." And there was a moment that would echo through Michael's entire life. The words that cut deeper than any belt. One day, I hate to repeat it, but one day, Joe said, "And God bless my father because he did some wonderful things and he was brilliant. He was a genius. But one day," he said, "if you guys ever stop singing, I will drop you like a hot potato." It hurt me. He would think, these kids have a heart and feelings. Wouldn't he think that would hurt us? If I said something like that to my kids, Prince and Paris, that would hurt. You don't say something like that to children, and I never forgot it. It affects my relationship with him today. 40 years later, Michael still carried those words. They were lodged in his heart, like a splinter that refused to work its way out. My childhood was completely taken away from me. There was no Christmas, no birthdays. It was not a normal childhood, no normal pleasures of childhood. Those were exchanged for hard work, struggle and pain, and eventual material and professional success. Michael Jackson was 5 when he started performing with the group soon to be called the Jackson 5. It hit me before I was a teenager. Michael said during a series of conversations with Rabbi Shmuley Batich, "I wanted so badly to play in the park across the street because the kids were playing baseball and football, but I had to record. A childhood traded for greatness. A son's innocence exchanged for the world's applause. And somewhere, deep inside, a question burned. Did Joseph ever realize what it had taken? Did he ever understand the cost of his methods? The world saw Michael Jackson as invincible. But behind the moonwalk and the iconic silhouette was a little boy still waiting for his father to say, 'I love you. I'm proud of you. Not for what you can do, but for who you are. That little boy never stopped waiting. By the mid-1980s, Michael Jackson had become the biggest star on the planet. Thriller had rewritten the rules of music. The moonwalk had become a global phenomenon. Michael could command anything he wanted. Anything except a genuine relationship with his father. Joe Jackson was fired from being his son's manager just as Michael became a worldwide superstar. The documents had been sent to Joe at home while Michael wasn't around. When they finally met to discuss the matter, Michael brought along an advisor so that he wouldn't have to be alone with Joe. The most powerful entertainer in the world was afraid to be in a room alone with his own father. "The fact you can't even talk to me unless you have this guy here," Joe said. "It hurts me, Michael. Do you know how it makes me feel? You know how I feel about you. Why do I always have to say it?" Michael quickly told his father that he'd never heard any such thing. "After all I've done for you and your brothers?" Joe asked, "Think about it. It's always been about you and your brothers. That's how I say it." There it was, the fundamental disconnect. Joseph believed that his actions were his love. The sacrifice, the discipline, the relentless pushing, that was how he expressed it. But for Michael, actions without words were not enough. He needed to hear it. He needed to feel it. Years passed. Albums came and went. Off the Wall, Bad, Dangerous, History, each one a masterpiece. Each one, in its own way, a cry from a wounded soul. Michael Jackson reportedly grew closer with his father after he had his own 3 children, but when he died in 2009, he had been estranged from his father, and his bodyguards recall not allowing Joe Jackson in when he attempted to see the superstar at his estate. Joe was not mentioned in Michael's will, but there was a strange paradox in Michael's heart. Despite everything, the fear, the pain, the distance, there was also love, complicated, wounded love that refused to die. Despite the allegations, Michael honored his father with an annual Joseph Jackson Day at Neverland Ranch and ultimately forgave him, noting that Joseph's difficult upbringing in the Great Depression and the Jim Crow South, along with his working-class adulthood, hardened him emotionally and made him push his children to succeed as entertainers. Michael understood something that took him decades to articulate. Joseph wasn't born cruel. He was shaped by a world that gave black men few options and no margin for error. Michael understood that Joe was a product of his time, when the belt or the switch was seen as the last protection between a rambunctious child and the merciless violence of Jim Crow America. Understanding, however, is not the same as healing, and Michael still needed something from his father, something that might have seemed small to anyone else, but meant everything to him. And when I think about this, of how I hope that my children will not judge me unkindly and will forgive my shortcomings, I am forced to think of my own father, and despite my earlier denials, I am forced to admit that he must have loved me. He did love me, and I know that. There were little things that showed it. When I was a kid, I had a real sweet tooth. We all did. My favorite food was glazed donuts, and my father knew that. So every few weeks I would come downstairs in the morning, and there on the kitchen counter was a bag of glazed donuts. No note, no explanation, just the donuts. It was like Santa Claus. Sometimes I would think about staying up late at night, so I could see him leave them there. But just like with Santa Claus, I didn't want to ruin the magic for fear that he would never do it again. My father had to leave them secretly at night, so as no one might catch him with his guard down. A bag of donuts left in the dark. That was Joseph's love language. Silent, hidden, afraid to be seen. A man who could not say, "I love you," but could leave sweetness for his son in the night. Michael clung to these memories. They were proof that somewhere inside the stern taskmaster was a father who cared. A father who simply didn't know how to show it. I had begun to see that even my father's harshness was a kind of love, an imperfect love, to be sure, but love nonetheless. He pushed me because he loved me, because he wanted no man ever to look down at his offspring. Imperfect love, but love nonetheless. The revelation was profound, but recognition is not reconciliation. And Michael still longed for a relationship that had never truly existed. A father he could talk to, laugh with, embrace without fear. Would it ever be possible? Or had too much damage been done? The year was 2005. Michael Jackson was fighting for his life. Allegations had resurfaced. The media descended like vultures. Every tabloid in the world seemed determined to destroy the man who had given them so much to write about. Michael faced trial on charges that could end not just his career, but his freedom. And in the middle of it all, something unexpected happened. In times of turmoil, it was Joe that the children continued to turn to. When Michael Jackson stood trial on allegations that he sexually abused a child, it was Joe Jackson who was at his side on most days. Joe joined other family members in his son's camp in 2005 when Michael was on trial. He was in the courtroom and reportedly showed no reaction when Michael was found not guilty on all charges that June. Well, you know that there was a reason why that happened. Jackson said about the accusations against his son. No reaction. Not outwardly. But what did Joseph feel inside? What did it mean to him that his son, the son he had driven so hard, pushed so relentlessly, was being put through this ordeal? Michael noticed his father's presence. He noticed that Joseph came day after day, sitting in that courtroom. The man who had difficulty showing affection, who had never said, "I love you" directly, was now showing up. It was his language, presence instead of words, action instead of emotion. And something began to shift inside Michael. "He is so different now," Michael said. "Time and age has changed him, and he sees his grandchildren, and he wants to be a better father. It is almost like the ship has sailed its course, and it is so hard for me to accept this other guy that is not the guy I was raised with. I just wished he had learned that earlier. 7 words carrying the weight of 40 years. The sadness in that statement is almost unbearable. A son acknowledging that his father had finally softened, but too late to undo the damage of the past. Michael was acquitted in 2005, but the trial had taken everything from him. His health, his spirit, his faith in the world. He left America, moving to Bahrain, then Ireland, then wandering the globe like a man without a home. And yet, in the aftermath, something had crystallized. Michael had seen his father show up when it mattered. He had witnessed Joseph sitting in that courtroom, day after day, a silent sentinel. Perhaps it wasn't the dramatic reconciliation movies are made of, but it was something. In Jackson's other high-profile interview, Living with Michael Jackson, 2003, he covered his face with his hand and began crying when talking about his childhood abuse. The wounds were still raw, even as forgiveness was taking root. Michael wrote a note that said, "Discipline with love, no violence ever," a philosophy he would carry into his own parenting. He was determined to break the cycle. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, would never know the belt, the harsh words, the conditional love. They would know only tenderness. Michael and all of his brothers were loving fathers, so they broke the cycle. That is perhaps Michael's greatest victory. Not the records, not the moonwalk, not the sold-out stadiums. It was becoming the father he never had. But even as he gave his children what he himself had been denied, the longing remained. The little boy inside Michael still wanted his own father to see him, to acknowledge him, to simply say the words. Would it ever happen? Time was running out, and neither Michael nor Joseph knew how tragically short that time would be. In 2009, Michael began preparing for what would be his greatest comeback, the This Is It concert series. 50 shows at London's O2 Arena. A return to the stage that would prove to the world that the king of pop still reigned. He never got the chance. June 25th, 2009. The world stopped. Michael Jackson, the greatest entertainer of all time, was gone. A cardiac arrest at his rented mansion in Los Angeles. 50 years old. On the cusp of his triumphant return. The saddest part about the whole thing was Michael tried to reach me, Joe told CNN. He says, "Call my father." This was before he passed. He would know how to get me out of this. But they didn't get in touch with me. They said they couldn't find me, but I was right there. Call my father. In his final hours, when something was terribly wrong, when the drugs were pulling him under and he knew he needed help, Michael thought of Joseph, the father who had caused so much pain, the father he had feared his entire life, the father whose love he had questioned for 40 years. Call my father. He would know how to get me out of this. After everything, Michael still believed his father could save him, still believed in his strength, his ability to fix things, his power to protect. Despite the wounds, Despite the distance, despite everything, in the moment of greatest need, Michael called for his dad. That single sentence reframes their entire relationship. It tells us that beneath all the pain, all the estrangement, all the words spoken and unspoken, there remained a son's faith in his father. A faith that never completely died. Hours after Michael died, Joseph spoke outside the Jackson estate. He tried his hardest to please everybody. He'd donate so much money to the sick. He helped the blind. He helped everybody that needed help, and he was glad to do it. Notice what Joseph said. He spoke of Michael's generosity, his humanitarian work, his desire to please. But he didn't say what Michael had always longed to hear. Or did he? Perhaps. For Joseph, listing his son's virtues was his way of saying he was proud. Perhaps, in his own inarticulate way, Joseph was trying to tell the world and himself that his son had been a good man. His son Michael was the greatest musical entertainer of all time, a singer and showman whose humanitarian contributions are often overshadowed by his massive catalog of timeless hits. But Michael also was profoundly damaged inside and out. He died in 2009 at age 50 of an overdose of prescription drugs he used to fight crippling insomnia. Joe Jackson took a lot of the blame for his son's troubles. The tragedy of their relationship wasn't hatred. It was timing. A father who didn't know how to show love while his son could still feel it. A son who forgave but never got to experience the full weight of his father's pride while he was alive to embrace it. I just wished he had learned that earlier. Those words echo differently now. Michael wished his father had learned to be gentle sooner. But Michael himself ran out of time to fully receive whatever gentleness Joseph was finally learning to give. Jackson only provided for his 3 children and Mother Catherine in his will, who was named as the children's guardian. That led Joe Jackson to wage a fruitless legal war seeking compensation from various entities. To the outside world, Joseph's legal battles after Michael's death looked like greed, like a man still trying to profit from his son. But perhaps it was something else. Perhaps it was a father trying to stay connected to a son who was no longer there, trying to matter in a story from which he had been erased. Or perhaps Joseph was simply being Joseph. Complicated, contradictory, impossible to fully understand. What we do know is this. It's easy to remember Joe Jackson as an abusive father whose quest to create superstar children resulted in one supremely gifted yet tortured soul. But Michael Jackson would want us to forgive him. Michael had already forgiven. That was his final gift to his father. A forgiveness offered not because it was deserved, but because holding on to anger is heavier than holding on to love. And Michael had carried enough weight in his life. Joseph Jackson lived 9 more years after Michael's death. 9 years to think about the son who had called for him in his final moments. 9 years to remember the small boy whose genius he had recognized and whose heart he had struggled to reach. 9 years to wonder if he could have done things differently. I don't regret the beatings, Joe told Oprah Winfrey in 2010. It kept him out of jail and kept him right. Even after Michael's death, Joseph defended his methods. He couldn't see them as abuse, only as necessary discipline in a world that was stacked against black families. None of the Jackson children's success would have happened without Joe Jackson. His children have credited his discipline and business savvy, such as leaving Motown for a more lucrative deal with CBS. For much of their success, the music industry is a treacherous, violent business. A weaker man than Joe Jackson could not have navigated his family through those shark-infested waters. The paradox of Joseph Jackson's legacy is that both things are true. He created something extraordinary, and he damaged something precious. He launched the careers of multiple superstars, and he left scars that never fully healed. On June 22nd, 2018, TMZ reported that Jackson was hospitalized in Las Vegas in the final stages of terminal pancreatic cancer. He died aged 89 at a hospice in Las Vegas at 3:30 a.m. on June 27th. He was surrounded by his wife and 9 of his 11 children. Joe Jackson died during the final stages of terminal pancreatic cancer. His death came 2 days after the 9th anniversary of his son Michael's death, and less than a month before his 90th birthday. 2 days after the 9th anniversary of Michael's death. As if even in dying, the connection between father and son remained unbroken. Prince Jackson, Michael's son, wrote about his grandfather's death. Spending those last few moments with you were everything. Being able to tell you everything I needed to tell you before saying goodbye was such a blessing. Everyone that came to visit you came with love, respect, and so much pride in their hearts for you. Proud of you, proud to be your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, proud to have your strength and share the dynasty you spent your life creating, and proud to be a Jackson. You are the first true Jackson, the legend that started it all. None of us would be anywhere near where we're at if it weren't for you. You are the strongest man I know. The grandchildren, it seems, found a peace with Joseph that was harder for his own children to achieve. Perhaps distance allowed perspective. Perhaps Joseph really had softened with age. Or perhaps the grandchildren simply chose to see the best in the complicated man who had started it all. His grandson, Taj Jackson, criticized comments made about his grandfather's death by those who didn't even know him, adding, "Joe was loved by our entire family and our hearts are in pain. Let us grieve without the nastiness." The family asked for compassion, for understanding, for the same grace Michael had found in his heart to extend his father years before. What does Michael Jackson's relationship with his father teach us? Perhaps it teaches us that love can be real even when it's broken, that a parent can damage a child profoundly, while also giving them the tools to change the world, that success and trauma can coexist in the same heart, the same life, the same family. Perhaps it teaches us that forgiveness is not about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's about choosing not to let that pain define the rest of your life. Michael forgave Joseph not because Joseph earned it, but because Michael needed to be free. Mahatma Gandhi said, "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong." Tonight, be strong. Beyond being strong, rise to the greatest challenge of all, to restore that broken covenant. We must all overcome whatever crippling effects our childhoods may have had on our lives, and in the words of Jesse Jackson, forgive each other, redeem each other, and move on. This call for forgiveness may not result in Oprah moments the world over, with thousands of children making up with their parents, but will at least be a start, and we'll all be so much happier as a result. Michael took the pain his father gave him and transformed it into art that moved billions. He took the loneliness of his childhood and channeled it into songs about healing, about connection, about making the world a better place. He broke the cycle. His children speak of him with pure adoration. Prince, Paris, and Blanket never knew the belt, the harsh words, the conditional love. They knew only a father who told them they were special, who held them, who showed up. That is Michael's true victory. Not the albums, not the records, not the moonwalk. His victory was becoming the father he never had. And in the end, he even found in his heart to see Joseph not as a villain, but as a man shaped by his own wounds, his own fears, his own limited understanding of what it means to love. Imperfect love, but love nonetheless. The screen fades to black. A single photograph appears. Michael Jackson and Joseph Jackson, standing together. Two men, one legacy. A lifetime of words spoken and unspoken. And somewhere, perhaps, a reconciliation that continues beyond this world. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Michael Jackson. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of forgiveness. There is a silence that lives inside every child who has ever felt unseen. It is not the silence of an empty room or a quiet night. It is deeper than that. It is the silence of waiting. Waiting for a word that never comes, a touch that never arrives, a look of pride that remains forever just out of reach. Michael Jackson knew that silence. He lived inside it for 50 years. From the outside, his life seemed impossibly full. The roar of crowds, the flash of cameras, the endless cascade of awards, accolades, and achievements that would have satisfied 100 ordinary lifetimes. He could fill a stadium with 100,000 people screaming his name. He could make the entire world stop and watch him dance. He could command attention from presidents and kings, from the famous and the anonymous alike. But none of it, not a single moment of that global adoration, could fill the space left by 3 words he never heard from the one person whose voice mattered most. I love you. That is a tragedy at the heart of Michael Jackson's story. Not the controversies, not the tabloid headlines, not even his untimely death. The real tragedy is simpler and more universal than any of that. It is the tragedy of a son who spent his entire life performing, first for his father, then for the world, hoping that if he was good enough, talented enough, successful enough, he might finally earn what should have been given freely from the start: a father's love, unconditional, unearned, simply there like sunlight, like breath. But Joseph Jackson did not know how to give love that way. He came from a world that did not teach men to be soft. He grew up in an era when black fathers had to be hard because the world was harder. He believed that discipline was love, that pushing was caring, that preparing his children for a cruel world meant showing them cruelty first, so they would be ready. And, in his own way, perhaps he was right. The Jackson children did succeed beyond anyone's wildest dreams. They did escape poverty. They did achieve things that seemed impossible for a black family from Gary, Indiana, in the 1960s. Joseph's methods worked. If success is measured only in records sold and stages conquered. But there is another measure. There's the measure of the heart. And by that measure, something was lost that can never be recovered. Something precious was sacrificed on the altar of ambition. Michael's childhood, his innocence, his ability to feel safe in the presence of the man who should have been his greatest protector. The image that haunts me most is not Michael on stage, triumphant and glittering. It is Michael as a small boy, looking out the window of that house in Gary, watching other children play in the park across the street. Children who got to be children. Children who did not have to rehearse until their bodies ached. Children who did not have to fear the belt, the switch, the cold stare of a father who was never satisfied. Michael watched them play, and he rehearsed. That boy never got to come out and play. Not really. Not even when Michael grew up and built Neverland Ranch, with its carnival rides and zoo animals and endless games. Neverland was not a playground. It was a monument to grief. It was Michael trying to give himself the childhood he had been denied, trying to fill a void that could never truly be filled, because you cannot go back. You cannot unlive the years of fear and pressure and loneliness. You cannot unhear the words that cut you. You cannot unfeel the absence of the words that should have been spoken. All you can do is choose what to do with the pain. And here is where Michael Jackson's story becomes something more than tragedy. Here is where it becomes a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Michael chose forgiveness, not because Joseph deserved it, not because forgiveness was easy or painless or complete, but because Michael understood that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. He understood that the only way to be free was to let go. He saw his father not as a monster, but as a man, a flawed, damaged, complicated man who did not know how to love in the way his son needed. A man who was himself shaped by wounds he never healed. A man who gave what he had. And what he had was not enough, but it was something. A bag of glazed donuts left on the counter in the middle of the night. A father showing up at a trial day after day, sitting in silent solidarity. Imperfect gestures from an imperfect man. Michael learned to see these gestures for what they were. Not the love he wanted, but the love Joseph was capable of giving. And he accepted it. He stopped waiting for his father to become someone different. He stopped hoping that Joseph would suddenly transform into the warm, emotionally available father of his dreams. Instead, Michael transformed himself. He became the father he never had. He held his children close. He told them they were loved. He made sure they knew, every single day, that they were enough, not because of what they could do, but because of who they were. He broke the chain of pain that had been passed down through generations. He stopped the cycle. That is Michael Jackson's greatest legacy. Not Thriller, not the moonwalk, not the humanitarian work that touched millions of lives around the world. His greatest legacy is that he took his pain and refused to pass it on. He took the wounds his father gave him and used them to become a better father himself. In the end, Michael Jackson did not get the fairy tale ending. He did not get to sit across from Joseph and hear all the words he longed to hear. He did not get to feel his father's arms around him, holding him the way he held his own children. He died still carrying that ache, still wondering, still hoping. But he also died having forgiven, having loved, having given his children what he himself was denied. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is the only victory any of us can truly claim, to take what we were given, however broken, and make something beautiful from it. To refuse to let our wounds define us. To choose love over bitterness, forgiveness over revenge, hope over despair. Michael Jackson never stopped being that little boy looking out the window, longing to play, but he also became something more. He became a man who looked at his own children and made sure they never had to look out that window. They were already free. And somewhere, in whatever peace he has found, perhaps Michael finally hears the words he waited a lifetime to hear. Perhaps beyond this world, fathers and sons find the language that eluded them here. Perhaps the silence has finally been filled. Rest now, Michael. The performance is over. The lights have dimmed. The crowd has gone home. You were enough. You were always enough.